My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might.
Okay. No, this is not the case, Peterson. There are some people who are irreverent. They have no reverence within them. It's not something that they are even capable of conceptualizing. And I don't mean that in the kind of like derogatory way many would mean that in the worded it. I mean that in quite literally, because they have no reverence to them. They are an irreverent person. The concept of reverence is alien to them. It is like asking them to jump into the water and say they're not wet, or to I don't know, up is down, etc. You are saying something that is so fundamentally alien to their concept of reality, they can't put it into a personalized or even abstracted concept that they can engage with. That's first of all. Second of all, including atheists, even though they might not know it, are there people who worship things that they don't know they worship? Absolutely. I have the sneaking suspicion with the way that you're going to describe worship, considering the way you described faith and atheist up until this point, is going to be some very Petersonian definition that only you fucking use, well, you and your little follower fucking incel douchebags. That being said, I look forward to the next young person taking a crack at you, because so far there's only been a couple of real misses, and that is more to do with their lazy thinking than to do with your prowess in debate. You have failed at every turn. Just a few of these young people didn't do as good as some of the others.
Not know it.
Oh,
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zina. So I want to start off with like
Zina.
defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Priorities.
okay. Prioritize. First of all, stupid fucking Peterson. Okay, this young woman is doing something that is wise. First of all, she's approaching with a very emotionless but approachable tone. She says, "I would like to start out," which is a very not submissive or subservient, but very tangentially engaging aspect of language, especially when you combine the tone of voice and looking up when she said it. Whether she's doing this intentionally or unintentionally, this is a very good one. Making him define his terms before you move forward and operating within the framework that he defines is a very excellent way to catch somebody like Peterson in their own bullshit.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something other than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
So you're
Right.
such an idiot.
And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose. Right. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So
Okay. I don't like the tricky way that he's playing with the language here. Instead of saying, yes, we'll hold to a pinnacle or a foundational framework for the case of this conversation, Peterson is allowing this level of ambiguity of it's either the uppermost or the most pivotal to the most foundational to the concept that he's going to be talking about. And this ability to bounce it around, he will use to confuse the language going forward.
So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid and being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
it depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation.
Okay, Peterson. That's not what she's doing. She's trying to clarify your haphazard bullshit archetypal fucking reasoning here. And what you are doing is, well, if you put the wrong thing in, of course it's not going to work. Saying the most obvious, reductivist version of her clarifying question to therefore not even answer her question. This is ignorant on your part, you fucking scumbag.
You end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're
So
saying
they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even
Right.
though they might be equally foundational,
right.
right?
So what makes one kind
No. Okay. Yes, you're playing tricky word games here. Technically, you did not just do a equivocation fallacy, although you got so goddamn close to the line, it's not even fucking funny. Because you're right, even though they are equally foundational, i.e., they are foundational at the foundation of any concept, they are not equal. Yeah, this is a proper way to evaluate these things. Unless you were evaluating in respect to the hierarchy, which is what her question was getting to the bottom of, quite literally based on your architecture here. So when she was asking about it in relation to the hierarchy that you are setting up, this system that you were setting up for her to engage with, and then you go, well, if you do this, it's fundamentally dishonest at best. At best, I personally think you're doing this to distract intentionally. Most people don't think you're that smart. I know better. You're a scumbag, and you're a sleazy scumbag at that.
of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game,
So
right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just
Okay, so adding a friend makes it better. So you literally went from a abstracting thing to adding in another interpersonal dynamic to appeal to an emotional truism, because most people, because humans are communal creatures, require some level of like relationship connection, be it friend, lover, whatever. You appeal to it in a way that most people that are not ready to rip you like apart like fucking pulled pork will not catch, because, oh yeah, of course, everyone needs a friend. That's always better. No, that's not always better, because a friend that has to be defined. Is a friend who always looks out, somebody who always looks out for your best interest? Is a friend somebody who always looks out for their best interest as long as it coincides with your best interest? Is it somebody who will be self-sacrificing to you to the point where it is highly beneficial to you but damaging to them? So on and so forth, because you are using an abstract and colloquialized term to cover a breadth of relationship type dynamics to do this type of reductivist truism. And it's shitty that Zina didn't catch it.
for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
right. So we're
Now
explaining like
add the
characteristics that
conceptual.
can be
Okay,
applied.
so you went from abstracted thing that is good for you, then an abstracted thing that is good for you and a friend, then to an abstracted thing that is good for you and a friend over time. Now, this is a perfectly logical way to build a framework if you were using actual like cemented terminology. The problem is you are constantly shifting through colloquial understanding of these and your own Petersonian interpretations of them and you are flip-flopping without saying anything to them. So by omission, doing a form of equivocation fallacy in this. It's not truly an equivocation fallacy, it's just a slick, like, used car salesman style of, like, rhetoric, but still.
To like these types of like foundational values. But
Mhm.
why is it that this iterability makes it better? And what does better mean?
Well,
Good
one
Glad you asked
hallmark
that
of better
question.
is likely to be selected voluntarily. So
Right.
it's invitation.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
Harmony.
harmony.
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Okay. So appealing to harmony. Well, that is at least a good value. I'll give you this, Peterson. Although I think this level of separation between happiness and harmony would then draw a deeper question of what makes this person happy may be aberrant to the community they live in, so much so that it becomes disruptive to the community. Like there's so much more that goes into it, and you're doing this intentionally so that you can play in these gray areas that you are not fleshing out.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it and it produces the opposite results to which you intend.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right. So the foundational principle.
No, 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 and I knew you were about to say this dumb shit. So if you put something in there and it doesn't come out how you expect, it could be that your foundational principle is wrong. It could be that your presuppositional conclusions were wrong going into it because you advocate for a form of like presuppositional logic in so many cases. That it could be that your foundational principle is perfectly sound, but you made a mistake in the implementation somewhere along the way that corrupted the outcome. There are so many different potentials within the scenario. For you to reduce it down to it's either this or this is a false dichotomy by definition.
Are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right.
Okay.
So we're talking about
Okay.
within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like stands independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how.
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a.
Well, he is only unfairly tortured if you believe that God can do things that are immoral. Otherwise, he was fairly tested by this mob boss that he worshiped. This is the same thing that I've been having to point out in your previous assertions of the story of Job. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Stop it.
Bet between God and Satan. So Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that
No.
is that
That is how we harmonize it. That is how in modern, not so modern times, roughly, I'd have to dig into my notes. I think it's about the 1820s. We start to see this harmonization that he was harmed and tested for no good reason. The good reason was a demonstration of God's power, according to the biblical scriptures. This is whether or not you take into account if the bet edition to the wager edition was added on later, if that's forgery, if that's divinely inspired. Even if you take the bet out, it was a demonstration of God's power in that moment. And that furthermore, it was a demonstration of this person, Job's, loyalty to their deity. That they would never lose faith regardless of what this deity allowed to befall them or made befall them, as is depicted within the story. This isn't a no good reason, because that is us hand waving it away. That is the harmonization where people do not have to try and engage with the concept of God's moralization, whether he is immoral or moral in this action, and whether or not that should make him worthy of worship. This is absolutely lazy, and you're doing this wording probably unintentionally because it's the way you've heard it your entire life, but it's incorrect.
He refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are
No,
those are
no, sir. That is an addition, an interpretation, and in my opinion, even a minor level of interpolation on your part. He never lost faith in God, Yahweh, in this Adonai. Pick your fucking name that you want to use. That he worshipped. It had nothing to do with the ultimate good, because in your very own scripture, it very well says that God is the source of all evil and all good. There is nothing that happens outside of his sight. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I pull up the scripture, but I don't care enough to do it for Peterson. But no, this is absolutely a harmonization of who are we to judge God, when quite literally the holy book that all Christians profess to to believe is either infallible in messaging or infallible in history, depending on what level of nuttery you're talking about. No, sir, absolutely not. You are fundamentally misstating what Job was believing in, because to you, this is what it would take for you to hold faith if you were Job. This is you doing your own level of interpretation and projection onto the character of Job.
axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
so
You
I
mean
mean-
independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific, something that can be good, right?
Good,
Regardless
be more
of
specific.
any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I
Mhm.
completely agree.
Okay. This is a very good question. I personally disagree with this, because there are things that can have no goal that can be good, absent of personal intent, secondary intent, or any kind of intentionality whatsoever behind the action. This comes from a greater level of chaos theory and a few other things. And I'm going to be very flippant about it for brevity. The butterfly flaps its wings, a hurricane happens in China instead of sunshine, blah, 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 blah. That's essentially the same thing that would happen in this particular abstractification and conceptualization that you are working on. There are things that could be completely stance independent, completely goal independent, that are good. Is it common? Probably not, but it is possible.
So in a sense, this is why
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
okay, right.
Okay. No, that is a form of dominionist thinking of Christianity. If you go back to the oldest doctors of the church, some of it had nothing to do with about bringing kingdom of heaven on earth. That it came with fundamental soteriology, that your salvation. It had to do with you being in communion with God and in alignment with God's purposes, so on and so forth. This is a modern common, mind you. This isn't me really shitting on Peterson too hard, although I, I like doing it, so I'm going to do it a little bit anyways. But it is a modern, common interpretation of the Bible that this is the main function of Christianity. It is not the main function of Christianity throughout time, although there are many times in history where it is so predominant it leads to literal conquest, genocide, and subjugation of other peoples to foster this religion further. But that is not a predominant amount of time. And my good buddy Rich, who does a couple videos here and there on this channel, will get on me about this because he'd say that this isn't necessarily accurate, but it is. I'm sorry, it just is.
It's in reference to a goal,
So,
or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the
that be
thing
true?
that they want to be in
Oh,
congruent.
right, okay.
Hang
It
on
is
a- That's right. That's
Sorry,
that's
sorry.
right. That's good. That's
Myself.
great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out because
That's a good question.
yes.
Yeah, well,
you.
probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross.
As I was saying, Rich would say this is not necessarily accurate, but it is. Yes, we have had a large amount of time where there was huge amounts of religious warfare, but those were very regional specific. They didn't encompass the whole world. Therefore, the majority of the world's population wasn't engaged in religious warfare, even when it was the predominant Western value at the time, Christian value at the time. If you look at the totality of human experience and the history, the majority of the time, Christians weren't all encompassing about creating the kingdom of heaven on earth. If I remember correctly, that really started being pushed, and I want to say about 1089, or if it's not 1089, it's 980 something. I not looking at my notes, so I apologize. But and then it ramped up, ramped down, ramped up, ramped down from that time period on until about the 1790s to 1810s. And then it became a steady, slow, gradual growth of this happening throughout Europe, North America, South America, etc. And it perpetuated very heavily until roughly the 1950s. Yes, there's a lot that goes into this. Yes, I am skipping a lot of steps in the middle. So, like, before you try to correct me down in the comments, I'm doing this for brevity because this video is already going to be slightly long. Just please take into account that this is something that you really do have to think about. A majority of the time, this was not the predominant driving factor of Christianity.
So
Or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the
that be
thing
true?
that they want to be in
Oh,
congruent.
right, okay.
Hang
It
on
is,
That's right.
Sorry,
That's right. That's good. That's
myself.
great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out because
That's a good question.
yes.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
probably the deepest.
It is a good question because you yourself are about to give some absolutely esoteric version of this answer, like many Christians do, by the way. It's kind of the part of your shtick. But what you are doing here is you started to stop her, even though she was pushing down to the foundational issue with your rhetoric here. And then she corrected herself because your pushback. I wish she hadn't. I wish she had kept drilling down to that foundation. But even though she didn't do that, she did ask a good question here. Let's hear your esoteric ephemeral bullshit.
Best answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition.
Okay, Zina, I'm sorry to interrupt you so many times because you are doing excellent. So far, probably the best person who has been on the show so far, just to be honest with you. That being said, what you are doing here, Peterson, is you are giving a not just self-sacrificing, because sacrifice can have many different connotations that can be joyous, can be mournful, can be so on and so forth. But what you have made it is willingly self-sacrificing by causing yourself suffering in the name of what you call good. Well, that's one way of looking at it, and it is one way that many Christians view it. You're not unique in this, so I'll give you that. At least this wasn't some weird esoteric bullshit like I'm used to from you. But you have hyper finited it down almost to like an Opus Dei, or I can't remember the name of the other cult that came out of fucking Elba. But there was another cult that was very similar to this, that, like, oh my God, like, this is not how most Christians view their Christianity and their worship of God or their relationship with God, depending on how they view their interaction with their deity.
Your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
I don't know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that,
No, that is not correct, although I understand the harmonization that he is doing. He is combining a few scriptures from here and there, by their good works you shall know them, and blah, 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 blah. But no, those who say, Lord, Lord, will not necessarily enter the kingdom of heaven, is not referring to the actions. It is referring specifically to the belief, and not just stating that you believe, but actually believing. It didn't have to do with the good works, although that is how many Christians view you have to be seen doing good works to be a Christian, despite that pesky little scripture that if you are doing things to be seen as righteous or holy, you've already received your reward on earth. You will receive no benefit of it by God's judgment. Like, they ignore that little part in this thinking. But, like,
to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that...
No, I'm going to interrupt you, Peterson. Your contrary example can wait a minute. Because what you have done here in the way that you have framed this is you have made it non-falsifiable by giving it a best founded, i.e. most probable, on something that you have no capability of calculating the probability of. I'd love to see your math, Peterson. I'd love to see. I like math. Please, please show me your math, asshole. Because otherwise what you're doing here is absolutely fucking just rhetorical flourishes and hoping that this person with much less experience than you doesn't catch it. Try it with somebody your own age and with your own level of experience. I remember when Matt Dillahunty kicked the living bejesus out of you on this. I'd take a shot. I'm sure I'd be able to do it too, because you suck.
Our rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, and let's say 60% of their
Zina, I like you. You are by far the best interlocutor that has come up so far. And I'm looking at that little red flag in the corner, half full. Whoever's holding up their flag is an absolute fucking moron. You are killing it here. But for fuck's sake, no. Why did you ask this question? Because what he is going to do now is he is going to point to the pre-Christian Christians, which is just Christians trying to steal the thoughts and accomplishments of people who had nothing to do with their religion, as if it was inspired by their God and a product of their church and their teachings. It is absolutely disgusting. I'd bet $5 he's about to bring up fucking Plato. I'd bet you $500 he's about to bring up fucking Plato.
Actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrifice.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
so is that
addressing the
Christian,
same.
though? Is that person?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So, so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity say acting out 8 of them.
Right.
So then they'd be 8 Christian.
He did in the abstract because of the way he brought up the Greek thinkers. He just didn't bring up the name. He's usually one to drop names. I'm surprised he didn't.
Or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally, because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical
belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the...
Okay. Peterson. God damn it. No. Because if acting out the belief, acting out the things is the deepest form, what if I had never been taught Christianity, yet you meet me and I am living a life that is the epitome of Christian teachings, or at least your version of Christian teachings, because we all know there's fucking thousands of them. But let's just say that I am. By your definition, that would make me a Christian without the Christian teaching, by the thing that you brought up in your previous point. Yet by this, no, because then you have to add in things that you say, because now you're trying to appeal to your Christian fan base who, oh, wait, no, they can't be Christian unless they say that the Jesus is Lord, blah, 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 all the fucking little rituals and purity tests that they put people through. You contradicted yourself by adding this caveat. What the fuck is, like, seriously, are you high? I thought you went to Russia to handle that problem.
The optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So
right?
what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really
Okay, so he realized he was about to paint himself into a corner there. Somebody who does all the right things but proclaims nothing. To him, if you don't proclaim these things, it means nothing. And he just let himself slip with the way that he started to frame that. And he realized it. He saw it, looked up, and he fucking cut himself off. Fucking see, this is why I don't think he's stupid. I think he does this intentionally. And occasionally he paints himself into a corner and then he jibber jabbers, which is what we're going to see here. Although I see that little red flag's almost full, so maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they'll vote her out, which would be stupid. She's been doing so good.
a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see
Why in boxes?
like when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that
Yeah,
way.
Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
No, it's-
Pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
okay, she's been voted out. Okay, so Jubilee, I'm just going to say it. I hate your format. I know I've said it in previous videos. This is the most ignorant way to do this because, like right here, it happened on a previous person as well. They're doing well, but these other people are waiting for their time to talk. They're trying to get their digs in for their channels and their socials, etc. This absolutely is entertaining to many, but it is counterproductive to actually like any kind of productive form of debate because the perverse incentives that are on every single member of the gallery that would be potential interlocutors are off the charts. Now, that's not to say all of them will act on it, but it is to say that you are creating an environment where it is more likely that they would, even if their nature normally would not incline them to do so. And it's kind of scummy that you do this. That's first. Second of all, Zina, you did great. You really were so far the best. Parker was a close second, because the reason he failed is his little "Are you an anti-fascist?" thing at the end, because like that was just digs because he was about to run out of time. He was doing good up to that point for the most part. You are probably the best one because you didn't have any of those like very obvious and very at least seemingly selfish moments where you're like, oh crap, I'm running out of time, or oh crap, there's so many red flags up, I gotta get my dig. You didn't do any of that. You stayed on message the whole time until they fucking hit the buzzer on you. You fucking tried to deal with his fucking I forget the name of the Gordian knot, I think is it. The impossible fucking knot that he ties in his logical fucking fallacious reasoning. You did excellent. I hope you take some pride in this. You did very well. And until the next video, which I will start here in another fucking 20 or 30 seconds, although for you it may be 2 or 3 days until you see it. Until then, this is torture. Peterson is an absolute nightmare. And I hope that you all enjoy this. I hope you enjoy my pain. I don't know how many of you are watching. I know there's going to be a certain number of you. Any of you who watched to this point, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Hi, I'm Jakk, and Come back to us next time on FOFA News and follow us on Substack and click the little bell down below. It helps a small channel like us out immensely. Thank you for coming.